Hey there and welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case, and tonight Kamala Harris introduces her running mate Tim Walz. U.S. officials thwart an alleged assassination plot, and Hamas picks the October 7th mastermind as its new leader. And of course, our friend Renata Kiss is still on vacation, so still filling in for her as co-host is FISM's Ian Patrick. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm happy to fill in anytime. And I have to say, I'm excited to hear what you have to say about the campaign rally between Kamala Harris and Tim Walz there. I'm interested to see what happened.
All right. Well, don't be disappointed because we're going to get into it right now. That's right, Ian. Kamala Harris officially introduced her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, last night, praising him as a sort of champion of the middle class at a rally in Philadelphia.
A fighter for the middle class. A patriot who believes, as I do, in the extraordinary promise of America.
I couldn't be prouder to be on this ticket and to help Vice President Harris become what we all know is very, very good for us to think about. Next President of the United States of America.
The rally was opened by Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, who just days before was widely expected to be named as Harris's running mate. During his speech, Shapiro emphasized his Jewish faith, possibly in an attempt to shrug off speculation that he wasn't picked for VP in order to appease the anti-Israel wing of the Democratic base.
I lean on my faith, which calls me to serve, and I am proud of my faith. My faith teaches me that no one is required to complete the task, but neither are we free to refrain from it. That means that each of us has a responsibility to get off the sidelines, to get in the game, and to do our part. Are you ready to do your part?
Meanwhile, Governor Walz spent a good portion of his speech attacking Trump's running mate, that would be J.D. Vance. Walz accused Vance of being out of touch with average Americans, despite growing up in poverty-stricken Appalachia.
Like all regular people I grew up with in the heartland, J.D. studied at Yale, had his career funded by Silicon Valley billionaires, and then wrote a bestseller trashing that community. Come on! That's not what middle America is. And I got to tell you, I can't wait to debate the guy.
His comments come as Vance has been slamming Walz as a left-wing radical whose policies would harm the working class.
I can't believe this is a guy who tries to claim that he stands for working people, and yet he wants to pursue energy policies that are going to ship everybody's job to China. In some ways, what Tim Walz represents is doubling down on failed 30 years of leadership in this country where we don't make enough of our own stuff, we don't use enough of our own workers to make enough of our own stuff, we rely on everybody else for energy instead of American citizens, and then we throw open the southern border to make our communities less livable and less safe. He is the double-down choice for failed leadership.
And you know, it wasn't long after Walz's nomination that many began critiquing him for his incredibly progressive agenda. Of note to pro-life individuals was his stance on abortion. For example, Live Action president and founder Lila Rose wrote on X that Walz had, quote, signed a law which allowed the killing of preborn babies at any stage while he was governor of Minnesota. Walz has been very vocal of his support for abortion, like in this speech.
And my record is so pro-choice, Nancy Pelosi asked me if I should tone it down. I stand with Planned Parenthood, and we won.
But his support for transgender care for minors is also raising some eyebrows. Jim DeMint, who is the chairman of the Conservative Partnership Institute, remarked that Walz is, quote, anti-school choice and pro-woke transgender policies. Similar to abortion, Walz has been very vocal about his support for kids to receive transgender procedures. Here he is commenting on a bill he signed, which made Minnesota a so-called trans refugee state.
I will never understand what goes into the thinking of these folks to bully these children. That is not impacting them in one bit and making it a living hell for children, for families, for adults, for folks who are just trying to bring themselves in. So in Minnesota, we're making it very clear we're not going to cooperate with these folks. We're not going to extradite people. We're going to say that this is a place where you can come to make these decisions. The trans community is as terrified as they've ever been. We've seen attacks across the nation, even here in Minnesota, and we're now saying we have to be much more proactive. We have to be much more aggressive about making sure that folks are protected.
Meanwhile, it remains an open question whether a hard-left pick like Walz will be beneficial to Harris's campaign, especially as progressive Democrats continue to lose in the primaries. Just yesterday, far-left Missouri Representative Cori Bush lost her primary to her pro-Israel challenger, Wesley Bell. Bush is now the second member of the so-called progressive squad to lose a seat this election cycle, following New York Representative, that is, Jamal Bowman's defeat in June. Both of them lost, at least in part, because of their harsh stances against Israel, and Bush is now blaming the pro-Israel group AIPAC for her loss after the group spent millions of dollars boosting her opponent.
Let me say this. AIPAC, I'm coming to tear your kingdom down.
In some other rather concerning news in politics, authorities have reportedly arrested a man with Iranian ties over an alleged murder-for-hire assassination plot against certain U.S. officials. Court documents show that the person arrested is a Pakistani national named Asif Merchant. Merchant arrived in the U.S. this spring, and by June, he unknowingly contacted undercover law enforcement officers who he believed would help him with his plot. He planned to return to Pakistan and provide names of the intended targets later in the year, but he was arrested shortly after making that initial contact. As of now, no definitive motive has been determined for the murder plot. However, his ties to Iran have authorities speculating that it could be an attempt to enact revenge for the 2020 killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. As such, some have even said that one of his targets included former President Donald Trump, who ordered the strike on Soleimani. The White House responded to the news, affirming that the government has been tracking such threats.
We have said many, many times, and I want to be really clear because this is a DOJ, it's an ongoing law enforcement DOJ indictment, so I'm going to be really mindful. But we have said many times that we have been tracking Iranian threats against former politicians. We've been very clear about that. These threats arise from Iran's desire to seek revenge for the killing of Qasem Soleimani. We consider this a national and homeland security matter of the highest priority,
And we're certainly glad he was stopped. It's certainly a dangerous time here in the U.S. Meanwhile, before we go to a break here, we do have an update in the markets where all three major U.S. stock indices were in the green yesterday after a massive sell-off on Monday saw prices tumble around the world. The $6.4 trillion stock wipeout was triggered by weak American jobs data and a Japanese market rout at the same time. Yesterday, the Dow rose by nearly 300 points, while the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ also ended the day up by about 1%. Meanwhile, on a much wider scale, indices around the world also appear to be stabilizing as Tokyo's major index saw a 10% rebound yesterday, marking a near full recovery from Monday's drop-off. And coming up next, the mastermind behind October 7th becomes the new leader of Hamas. The details on that story and more after this.
Navigating through investment options can be challenging, especially when you're determined to uphold your God-given values. Every dollar you invest is a vote for the world that you want to live in. Let your values guide your investment decisions and help to shape the culture in which we live. Become a beacon of light and pave the way with biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, where faith and finance collide. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the investment company. This and other important information can be found in the fund's prospectus. To obtain a copy, visit timothyplan.com or call 800-846-7526. Read each prospectus carefully before investing. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal.
My name is Valtasia. I have 5 kids total. I was basically a single mom. I didn't have an address to my name, and here it comes, that not just one baby I'm finna have, it was 3. I honestly was not gonna keep them. I had it in my mind deep down inside that I couldn't do it. I came straight abortion minded. What changed my mind was I talked to the counselor and, very encouraging. They'll also tell me, you're not going to be alone. If you need anything, reach out to us or anything. I was amazed. I definitely have a challenge of having my babies. A lot of people will ask me, how do you do that? How do you maintain? Only thing I can say is prayer. Prayer really, really works.
To donate, just dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby, or go to financialissues.org and click on the preborn banner.
Hey there, welcome back to FISM News. I'm Ian Patrick. Let's continue our coverage with an update coming out of the war in Gaza. As Sam said before the break, Hamas has appointed Yahya Sinwar to be its new political leader to replace former chief Ismail Haniyeh. Haniyeh was assassinated by Israel last week in the Iranian capital of Tehran. The move sparked ire from both Hamas and the Iranian government, but also left a critical vacancy in the Hamas hierarchy. That role, which includes decision-making for the terror group, will now be fulfilled by Sinwar, who is notoriously known as the mastermind behind the October 7th attack on Israel, which started the Gaza war. The West responded to the news with some skepticism regarding the chances of a ceasefire deal. President Biden spoke with mediators from Egypt and Qatar, expressing urgency in bringing the process to a close as soon as possible. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, meanwhile, responded to Sinwar's ascendancy by putting the responsibility of a ceasefire on his shoulders.
With regard to Mr. Sinwar, he has been and remains the primary decider when it comes to concluding a ceasefire. And so I think this only underscores the fact that it is really on him to decide whether to move forward with a ceasefire that manifestly will help so many Palestinians in desperate need.
Meanwhile, 7 U.S. personnel are still recovering from injuries following a rocket attack at the Al-Assad air base in Iraq. The Pentagon now says that Iran-backed militias were behind the strike that ended up wounding 5 service members and 2 contractors. This attack comes as tensions are nearing a boiling point in the Middle East as Iran now prepares to attack Israel over the killing of Hamas's top political leader last week. Secretary of State Blinken is now urging both sides to refrain from further escalation.
Over the past few days, we've been in constant contact with partners in the region and well beyond. In those conversations, we've heard a clear consensus. No one should escalate this conflict. We've been engaged in intense diplomacy with allies and partners, communicating that message directly to Iran. We communicated that message directly to Israel.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke with Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant on Monday. Both of them agreed that the attack on American forces in Iraq, quote, marked a dangerous escalation and demonstrated Iran's destabilizing role in the region.
And in response to that escalation, military officials from the U.S. announced that jets from the USS Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier are currently being redeployed to a base in the Middle East. Experts believe that the move is part of an effort by the U.S. to deter Iran from trying to attack Israel. As we've mentioned, Iran has threatened to launch a war against Israel following the high-profile assassinations of both the Hamas leader as well as the leader in Hezbollah. The redeployment of the jets is reportedly a temporary move while the Al-Assad base waits for a more permanent squadron to arrive from Alaska. Although the Department of Defense, announced the recent movements, they did not exactly clarify where the planes were being deployed.
And that's not the only place where tensions are rising, as the State Department is now urging Americans to avoid traveling to Bangladesh amid governmental collapse. That warning comes after a revolution in the country's capital of Dhaka forced 15-year Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to resign and flee the country. Following her resignation, banker and longtime government critic Mohammed Yunus was appointed to lead an interim government. But Yunus, who, by the way, once was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, he's been unable to stop ongoing unrest and violence throughout the country. The Muslim majority there has reportedly been targeting the country's Hindu population and attacking over 200 homes and businesses. On Monday, Dhaka's international airport suspended flights amid this ongoing violence.
And let's finish up our international coverage with a story from the UK, which apparently has recently picked a fight with tech entrepreneur Elon Musk on a rather touchy topic. And just a heads up that some of the following content could be disturbing for certain individuals. Now, Musk has made multiple posts on his social media platform recently questioning the validity of the UK justice system with regards to immigrant crimes. For example, one of his posts showed how a British man received 15 weeks of jail time for a so-called racist comment on Facebook. That same post referenced another case where an immigrant from Kuwait received 180 community hours after being convicted of repeatedly raping a 12-year-old girl. Subsequent posts from Musk focused on similar themes, an apparent lack of action from the UK authorities against immigrant gangs committing various crimes, while on the same hand, there's intensified action against its citizens for online posts and statements. UK Justice Minister Heidi Alexander responded to Musk's post, saying that people like him should be exercising their power responsibly. And of course, this comes as the UK is experiencing riots from its citizens over the alleged preferential treatment of Muslim immigrants, who have also been engaging in their own counter-riots. And we have plenty more news coming up next, but first, why don't we go to Seth Udinsky for a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In world history, there are a few characters so sinister that their name literally denotes a specific type of sin or vice. In this case, the vice is greed and the sin is betrayal. The man was one of the closest friends the Lord Jesus Christ had on earth, but he is remembered throughout history as a vile wretch who sold his Lord to be executed for a mere 30 pieces of silver. Despite the years that he walked with Jesus, learned from Jesus, and witnessed the miracles of Jesus, in the end, he still betrayed Jesus. He is Judas Iscariot. Very little is known about Judas's life before he met the Lord, but historical context and scriptural interpretation reveal he was likely several years younger than Jesus, meaning a man in his early 20s. Though very few of them knew at the time, Judas's sinister destiny was long foretold in the prophecies from the words of King David in the Old Testament. But before his treachery, he was handpicked by Jesus to be one of the 12 disciples, Jesus' closest friends and students. Now, we have to remember that Jesus and his disciples were itinerant, so this means they shared resources as they traveled, much like a family would. As such, they needed a keeper of the money, a treasurer, if you will, and Judas filled this role. While he may have been a shrewd money manager, the New Testament authors reveal that he was also greedy, often pocketing a share of the disciples' money for his own personal use. Judas's sin of greed was coupled with a heart that never truly surrendered to the lordship of Jesus Christ. Judas was not looking for a personal savior necessarily. He was much more interested in a political lord who would overthrow the ruling Romans and reestablish the might of the ancient kingdom of Israel. When Judas realized that Jesus' kingdom was actually far different than this, his true colors were revealed. So in secrecy, he conspired with the religious leaders to deliver Jesus into their hands to be tried and then executed. The leaders agreed to pay him 30 pieces of silver, the going price of a slave in that day. So on the night of the first Passover, Judas slipped quietly away from the disciples' Passover meal to bring the religious leaders to the Garden of Gethsemane, where they would then arrest Jesus. The indication of who they should arrest would be the one who Judas kissed. In an ultimate act of treachery, Judas turned his back on Jesus, who would be arrested and crucified the next day. Now, for Christians, we know the death of Jesus Christ ends in the happiest way possible with his victorious resurrection and the sure hope of eternal life for all who would place their faith in him. But for Judas, whose heart belonged to Satan, he never saw the resurrection. Upon witnessing the death of Jesus Christ, he became overcome with guilt and torment, and he returned to the religious leaders, threw the money on the ground at their feet, and then went and committed suicide. Thanks so much for joining me once again for a moment in history.
Through the ministry of Preborn, the Financial Issues family has saved tens of thousands of lives of babies. What an amazing job that God has done through you, the Financial Issues family. Would you join us in saving the lives of babies? What an amazing reunion we will have in glory, meeting all the people that we have saved. Please go to preborn.org, that is preborn.org, or financialissues.org, and click on the Preborn banner.
If investing with biblical values is important to you, you're not alone. Millions of people invest their money according to their personal beliefs. That's why we offer a subscription service that gives you access to biblically responsible stocks, buys and sells, and a portfolio tracker tool that tracks your asset allocations. Being a Financial Issues partner is the best way to ensure your investments reflect your values. At Financial Issues, we believe in providing our partners with the best possible information and resources so they can make informed decisions about their money. With our help, you can feel confident that your investments are in line with your personal beliefs. Gain access to our biblically based stock buys and sells for only $132 per year. Invest biblically, responsibly. Go to financialissues.org and become a partner today. That's financialissues.org.
All right, and welcome back to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. We begin with a quick heads up for all you farmers and gardeners out there, as the EPA has now issued an emergency ban on a common weed killer called Dacthal, or DCPA. It's the agency's first emergency order issued in 40 years, saying the herbicide is linked to birth defects, including low birth weights and impaired brain development. A report shows the chemical remains a risk even when using protective gear and can linger for up to 25 days. As a result, the EPA is now calling for it to be removed from the market effective immediately.
Always good to stay on top of those kinds of stories, and hopefully one that will benefit our farmers. But let's look now at some politics once again with a Second Amendment update, where a federal appeals court upheld Maryland's assault weapon ban on Tuesday, following heated debate on how recent Supreme Court gun rights precedents should apply. For context, the ban does also apply to semi-automatic rifles equipped with high-capacity magazines. The majority opinion called them dangerous and unusual weapons. Now, the judges wrote that they would not use the Constitution to put them, quote, beyond the reach of our nation's democratic processes. But the decision was far from unanimous. One judge fired back in a dissent that the ruling essentially gives states the leeway to trample on constitutional liberties. The law initially went into effect 10 years ago and was upheld by the court in 2017. It went to the Supreme Court, which actually sent the case back to the appellate judges to reconsider in light of the landmark Bruin decision.
And speaking of legal battles today, this week social media platforms X and Rumble announced lawsuits against an advertising trade group and its members. Both accused the World Federation of Advertisers of using cartel-like practices and anti-competitive activities to force tech platforms to censor content on their websites. The lawsuit, filed in the U.S. District Court of North Texas, alleges that the WFA, that is, used the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, or GARM, to force advertisers to boycott platforms until they censored disfavored, typically conservative content. Documents obtained by the House Judiciary Committee were used in this lawsuit, and according to those documents, GARM and its members targeted conservative news outlets for boycotts for spreading alleged misinformation.
All right, and let's move now to some coverage out of the Olympic Games in Paris, where apparently the historic use of the Seine River is becoming a nightmare after multiple athletes were hospitalized. Following delays due to high E. coli levels in the river, officials said that it was finally safe enough for triathletes to swim in the Seine last week. However, Belgium's Claire Michel was apparently hospitalized for multiple days following the women's race. Her nation was actually even forced to withdraw from the mixed triathlon relay as a result. Switzerland's Adrian Brifford also says he was seriously ill after the men's race. The athletes were some of the first in the Seine after Paris spent $1 billion on cleaning up the polluted river, marking a critical element of the city's winning bid for the 2024 Olympics. Swimming has been a banned activity for the river for the past 100 years, however, making this quite a project. Game administrators maintain that the water quality is safe and that the 10-kilometer open water swims will be held tomorrow and Friday.
You know, I don't know about you, Ian, but I think if I was a swimmer in the Olympics, I'd still be a bit skeptical. You know, the place has been dirty for 100 years. I'd be doubting they could clean it up just in a couple of weeks.
I'd feel the same. I'd feel much more comfortable in the chlorine pool than in the Seine River, I think.
Just a bit safer, that's right. Meanwhile,
just a bit safer.
That's right. Meanwhile, that's not the only controversy at the Olympics, as many fans remain absolutely outraged at the IOC for allowing 2 biological males to compete in women's boxing, Aman Khalif of Algeria and Lin Yuting of Taiwan. Those are the 2 fighters. CEO of the International Boxing Association, Chris Roberts, held a press conference this week to address that controversy. There he explained how both fighters failed a gender test in 2023 to compete in the association's women's competition.
There was a number of concerns from boxers, coaches, indeed the medical team, medical staff, the ringside doctors, regarding these 2 boxers in particular. Blood tests were taken. A gender test was taken as it was. The results came through and it demonstrated the chromosomes that we refer to within the technical and competition rules that make both boxers ineligible.
Those findings were then reiterated by the former chair of the IBA Medical Committee as well.
Looks and stated laboratories that these boxers is male.
Despite the IBA's findings, the Olympics is still standing by their decision to let Khalif and Yuting compete. Both of them made it to the semifinals, with Khalif fighting in the gold medal match this Friday.
Certainly a lot of interesting stories coming out of the Olympic Games there, Sam, but thankfully not all at the Olympics is bad or concerning news. So why don't we take a look at how American Olympians have made some more great achievements this week, starting with track and field star Gabby Thomas, who finally won her gold medal yesterday in the 200-meter sprint. This comes after the 27-year-old nearly broke the 200-meter women's record during the U.S. Olympic trials earlier this year. And the now Olympic champion never even planned to be a runner in the first place, but actually began competing while attending Harvard University. So sort of an inspiring story there. Meanwhile, let's turn to USA men's basketball, which dominated Brazil to advance to the semifinals with a final score of 122-87. Kevin Durant topped Lisa Leslie during the match as Team USA's all-time leading Olympic scorer. Leslie set the previous record with 488 points. Durant now has scored 494. And the men's team will play Serbia on Thursday. And before we end our show for today, I want to announce that FISM News will not be live for the rest of this week. Instead, we'll be showing 2 feature-length Moment in History specials exploring redemptive history as orchestrated by God. Tune in Thursday and Friday to see both installments in this series presented by Seth Udinsky.
Yeah, we really think you will enjoy those programs. And with that, that is our show for today. So thank you so much for joining us. And please visit FISMnews.tv for more content. You can also download the FISM app. Thank you so much. God bless. And we'll see you on Monday with more news.